Hey, strangers. It's been a while, a little bit, but I'm back. If this is the first time that you're seeing my face, hi, my name is Kayla. This is my channel to talk about all things horror, film, books, other things, whatever that might be. So, how are y'all? Because spring is upon us. Time has changed here in the United States. We had our daylight savings started again. So the sun is out, it's warm, love is real, happiness abound, and I am full of mucus. So please forgive me for the way that I sound today, but I wanted to get something out since I haven't had anything in a while. The last thing that I recorded was a video game, and I'm not really sure if I want to post it yet. I'm still kind of toying with the idea. So if I put it up and in that video I have longer hair because I chopped mine off, you will know why, because it was recorded a few weeks ago. Today, I wanted to talk to you about a movie that I just watched that I was really interested in checking out. It's called Stopmotion, and it was made in 2023. The director is Robert Morgan. Writers are Robert Morgan and Robin King. The cast features Aisling Frankiosi. I don't know if that's how you say it, but she played Lyanna Stark in Game of Thrones, and she was also in this really awesome movie called The Nightingale, which was not strictly a horror movie, but it was definitely very disturbing. It's about a woman in Australia when it was still a penal colony trying to seek out the men who murdered her husband with an Aboriginal man, and he helps her navigate through the bush. And it's just there are so many layers to that movie. It was a really good watch if you want to check it out. By the way, this video is going to be me practicing just giving you the synopsis of the movie and then telling you what I think about it. Try to cut down on the yapping, even though I really like yapping. So that's going to be tough for me. Because especially I saw a lot of symbolism in this movie, even though by Act 3 it kind of fell flat for me. But I'm doing my best. She's got to stop. She's yapping. Okay, so this movie is about a woman named Ella, and she is living with her mother, who has severe arthritis and her hands are crippled. And her mother is a stop motion artist. And through Ella, because she can't use her hands, she's creating her final piece before she dies. Ella is probably late 20s, early 30s. She's got a boyfriend named Tom. She's friends with Tom's sister, Polly. Both of them are also in the business of making stop motion films, but they work for a corporate outfit. And Ella and her mother are doing these films independently. So we see this relationship between Ella and her mother, where her mother is kind of barking out orders at her. Don't move 1 millimeter to the left, do this, do that, take the photo. I don't know about you guys, but there's a certain kind of stop motion that's always been particularly unsettling to me for some reason. I tried to watch the film Mad God a little while ago, which is a completely stop motion. It features no voiceover narrative, no voice acting or anything like that. It's just stop motion, takes us through kind of this nightmarish apocalyptic scenario. And it was just so creepy. It was so creepy. But then you have stop motion, claymation, Nightmare Before Christmas and other Tim Burton movies that is very whimsical and delightful. Although, it's bent towards the horror angle. So Ella's helping her mom make her kind of final film. At some point in the movie, her mother has a stroke. And it seems like Ella is really consumed with guilt, fear, grief. There's a scene where she pictures her mother's skinless corpse on the ground, made fully out of the clay that she would use to shoot these films. But she decides, I'm going to continue working on my mom's film for her. But because she's so traumatized by, her mom having this stroke and potentially earlier trauma, she and her boyfriend decide that it's a really good idea for her to move into this studio apartment well, it's not a studio apartment. He calls it a studio. It's just a 1-bedroom apartment. She moves into this place just to be separate from the environment that she grew up in and was filming these films in. So she moves in and thus begins her descent into madness. She meets this little girl who never gets a name. She's billed, I think, as a little girl in the credits. And it's very obvious to me that the little girl is a representation of a part of Ella. And to me, it also seemed like her mother was a representation of a different part of her. So after Ella meets the little girl comes into her apartment and is like, what are you doing? What's going on here? What's the story? And Ella explains that the film that she's making for her mother is about a cyclops who makes a trade with the gods. She gives the gods one of her eyes in exchange for seeing her destiny, but she witnesses her own demise. And I guess the story unfolds from there, and it just seems like Ella is telling us what is happening to her, right? She watches her mother practically pass away without having finished her last film, which is really frightening when you're a creative person, when you're an artist, not being able to finish that last piece. I can imagine that could be really daunting. So this little girl hears about the story that she's creating, and she's like, wow, this sucks. You should create something totally different, which, as a therapist, I'm hearing some like narrative therapy there. The idea of like, you don't like the story, then scrap it and rewrite it. Write something that makes more sense to you. But the story that she comes up with is a disturbing one, right? So she starts out and she only gives Ella these little bits and pieces. So she starts out by saying, okay, there's a little girl and she's lost in the woods. And Ella's like, what's so scary about that? And the little girl is like, she's running from something. Who's she running from? A man, of course. It's always a man. So we see after this happens, Ella has like her first, what seems like a dissociative episode. And her boyfriend, Tom, comes in to check in on her. And she has scrapped the entirety of her mom's project and has rebuilt this whole new scene, but doesn't even remember doing so. He's kind of like, oh, you've been busy. And she's like, what are you talking about? There's also a lot of juxtaposition in this movie in shots of like raw meat, dead things, corpses. And in fact, at the little girl's request, Ella uses raw meat that her boyfriend has brought over to cook them for dinner to make a new doll that represents the little girl. So she mixes together this raw meat and mortician's wax. So like very, very obviously representative of something that is dead. And she creates this little girl, and it looks very grotesque and yucky and gross. And the villain in the story of this new movie that she's making is called the Ash Man, and he's the man that no one wants to meet. And this little girl kind of follows Ella everywhere, right? She goes to visit her mother. She goes to see her boyfriend. She goes to a party, and this little girl kind of always shows up everywhere. And she's demanding, just like her mother did, she's demanding that Ella do this and do that and incorporate this, incorporate that. And at one point, she insists that Ella, Ella has another dissociative episode, and she ends up in the woods in front of this corpse of a fox. And the little girl is like, use this to make one of the characters in the film. And Ella's like, that's disgusting. I'm not going to do that. But later on, after she attends a party where she takes LSD for inspiration, because she feels like she's losing grip on inspiration, like she doesn't have what it takes to be an artist like her mother was, or like her friends who are working for this corporate claymation studio. So she takes LSD from Tom's sister, Polly, and the little girl shows up at the party and again leads her out to the fox corpse. And she's like, fine, I'll do what you're asking me to, because the little girl keeps telling her like, fine, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I won't tell you the next part of the story. And of course we know the little girl is a part of Ella. So this is Ella's opportunity to tap into her own inspiration and her own creativity. And she keeps hitting these blocks. And in order to get over the block, she keeps having to push herself further and further. And it reminds me of, I was just watching a clip. If any of you are familiar with the rapper Queen Herbie, I was watching a clip from her podcast where she was just talking about creativity and inspiration and the idea that sometimes we have to push past the boundaries that our brain sets for us when we're trying to create something, because we're really limited by the boundaries of our own minds, I guess. And so we have to like push past a comfort zone. So it made me think of that idea that creativity requires stepping out of your comfort zone and trying some things that maybe you've never tried before, or that make you feel a little scared. And so she takes the fox corpse. I just can't imagine how this woman's apartment smells. She's got like raw meat mixed into these dolls. She's brought in a decaying fox corpse. I mean, ugh, it probably smells so bad. So after the party and after she brings the fox back to her house, she has another dissociative episode, or she just passes out after using LSD. It's not really clear. And her boyfriend finds her on the floor and she's kind of having a panic attack. She's having an episode and he's like, oh, it must be the drugs, you know? So he takes her back to his place so that she can just rest and be away from everything. And she starts to have these like hallucinations. Like she hallucinates that she is turning into wax. She sees the character of the little girl, not the actual physical little girl who's actually not real, but the little claymation little girl is like coming into her room and has like a mind of its own, really. And in order to keep her distracted from what's going on with her, her boyfriend takes Ella into his corporate job. And I think that's where we really see that juxtaposition that the directors, the writers are trying to make here, one of them anyways, which is, you know, what is it that makes someone a real artist? So if you are an artist and you're doing something creative, but you're doing it at a corporate job, you know, you've got, you're a W-2 employee, you've got like a 401k and benefits, and you're getting a bi-weekly paycheck, and you're doing something creative. Are you an artist, or are you not an artist? Because what goes into being an artist or a creative is pain and suffering and being broke and struggle and all of these raw and dirty things, versus, you know, her boyfriend and his sister who are working at this company where I think at one point Polly, Tom's sister, remarks that like the clients are very demanding. So there's no free flow of creativity. She's doing what somebody else tells her to. And at one point, interestingly enough, Ella remarks that she doesn't feel like she can be creative in her process without someone telling her what to do. So it's really interesting that she's opposed to this kind of corporate structured setting, but at the same time, she needs that kind of direction and that kind of influence in order to feel like she's worthy enough, or her art is worthy enough. So when she's there, when Ella is at Tom and Polly's workplace, she finds out that Polly has stolen her idea for a film. And Polly is like, well, I made it a lot better. You know, like I started with your raw idea and I polished it up. It looks a lot nicer, essentially. Which again is that juxtaposition of like, okay, you have this great budget and you have more to do, but you're still constrained by creativity. And Polly can't even think of her own ideas. She has to steal them from someone else. Ella visits her mother, who is, I'm sure, not actually awake and aware, conscious and able to talk to her, but she imagines herself having a conversation with her mother where her mom says it's a wonderful medium, bringing dead things to life. And that's essentially what she's doing, you know, with these, first the meat, then the corpse. She's incorporating them into this work that she's doing. She's bringing the dead back to life. And Ella says to her, I'm scared of carrying on, but I'm also scared of stopping. And she's like, you know, Mom, I don't want to be like you. And her mother says, you're nothing like me. I can control it. You have no control over it. And of course, what we're talking about is the creative process. But the creative process in this film is manifested through the villain in the film within the film, the Ashman. So the little girl is the one who creates the villainous character of the Ashman, and she has this whole narrative arc around him. He comes 3 different nights, right? So this little girl is running scared through the woods. She finds a cabin, and the Ashman comes 3 different times. She says on the first night, he sees the little girl. On the second night, he touches her. And the second night for Ella, this creation becomes life-size. And we're assuming that she's hallucinating, of course. Ella becomes this very teeny tiny, featureless claymation version of herself made from mortician's wax. And she's being chased by this giant life-size Ashman through these different scenes and ends up in what looked like to me to be a coffin, like the lining of a coffin. At the end of this very hallucinatory, delusional scene, the Ashman like pukes out this, what looks like a blueberry, and he shoves it into her mouth. I think that's maybe a little too woo-woo for me, but we'll get there in a second. There's a scene where Ella attempts to like strangle the little girl, but she doesn't die because she's not real, you know? And the little girl says, she kind of like laughs about it. And she's like, oh, you got that out of your system, which I think is really interesting. It's this idea, perhaps, that Ella is either trying to kill off a part of herself, a part of her younger self, or this creative part of her that she's battling so much with. Because throughout this movie, her and this little girl argue so much. So you could see that as her having this back and forth with the creative side of her and not really knowing what she wants and not really feeling brave enough to move forward. So right before we have this climactic third night where the Ashman is supposed to come back for the final time, Ella slips into another dissociative episode, delusional episode, whatever we want to call it, because there's obvious descent into madness here as a part of this film. And she, trigger warning here, because this is a body horror part that I had to look away because I get squeamish at things like this. So Ella has a wound in her leg that she had been hospitalized for. She tears out the stitches and she starts to dig into it and pulls out a ligament or something. She like rips it out of her leg. And as she's doing this, Tom and Polly have come to check in on her to see if she's okay. So obviously they start to freak out and, you know, try to help her. She ends up killing them. So the third night that the Ashman comes, we have this scene where he essentially consumes her. Either they become one person, or we can see this kind of as her art or her fear consuming her. And in the end of the film, she steps into this crate that has the same lining as the earlier scene of her kind of barging into the coffin. And she closes the lid, and that's the end of the movie. So we're kind of like left to guess what this movie means. So like I said earlier, the third act for me kind of fell flat because I feel like it was just doing too much. Like it was just trying to take itself too seriously. I can see that there's commentary here about the creative process and fear of our creativity, and also the fear of not being worthy enough as an artist. It's something that I experience from time to time as a writer, or as just a creative person in general. And, you know, tell me, is it something that you experience if you're a creative person too? This, you know, the fear creating this creative block and difficulty accessing those parts of you that lead you freely into the creative process. You know, for me, there's a flow state where I can just kind of write and write and write and write. And lately I've been in that flow state, found my muse. But a lot of the time there's stopping and editing in the moment and second guessing myself and wondering if I'm going down the right path, and would anyone read this, and is this good enough, and why would I even think that I could put this out into the world? And oftentimes I don't even share it with anybody. I mean, I think it was an interesting movie for me to find at this point in time, because I just thought it was coincidental that, you know, I've had this spark of creativity recently and I've been writing a lot more. So it was interesting to see somebody else's perspective on the creative process through the lens of horror. Was this the most terrifying movie I've ever seen? No. I'd probably give it like a 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't a bad movie, but like I said, some of it came across as like, I'm 14 and this is deep. So take from that what you will. I would say check it out and see what you think. I just watched it. I rented it. It was on YouTube for like $7. Was it worth $7? I don't know. I spent $7 on it though. That's my brief overview review thoughts on this movie Stopmotion and the potential meaning behind it. If you're interested in the movie, tell me what you think when you watch it. Or if you've already seen it, tell me what your thoughts are. Or if you've ever experienced this kind of relationship with the creative process, if you're an artistic person, I'm really curious to hear about that too. But that's all I have for you today. So I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Feed the algorithm. And I'll see you soon. Bye.